Being fresh out of college and on a tight budget, I decided it was wise to purchase a used car. It was a decision purely for convenience, as public transport wasn't cutting it anymore for my daily commutes. The car itself was a decent find, or so I thought, until about a week into driving it. That's when things started getting weird. At first, it was just odd sensations, like feeling you're not alone even though you obviously are. Then it escalated quickly. I started noticing glimpses in the rearview mirror of someone sitting in the back seat. But every time I looked directly, no one was there. This presence became more frequent and, frankly, more bold. It shifted from the back seat to the passenger seat beside me, and this wasn't just some blur or shadow. It was clearly the figure of a man, looking like he'd been through tough times, possibly a drug addict who would vanish as quickly as he appeared. I tried selling the car, no luck. I even went as far as consulting with some local psychics who suggested various talismans, which obviously did nothing. This phantom passenger wasn't fazed in the slightest. Months passed, and an urgent business trip required me to drive to a neighboring city. By this time, I had grown somewhat accustomed to my unwelcome passenger. However, on this particular trip, everything changed. Just as I was about to merge onto the freeway, the ghostly figure did something new. It physically attacked me, attempting to choke me from the back seat. I managed to pull over, shaking and more frightened than ever before, but when I tried to get out, the doors wouldn't budge. I was trapped inside with whatever this thing was. In desperation, I turned on the radio, seeking any distraction. After what felt like an eternity, I heard a breaking news report about a massive pile-up on the very freeway I was about to enter. The timing was uncanny. Had I been on my original schedule, I would have been right in the middle of it. My phone, which I'd been frantically searching for earlier, suddenly rang from the back seat. It was my boss checking in. Our conversation was brief, but it gave me the courage to try the ignition again. This time, the car started normally, and the apparition was gone, never to return. In the aftermath, I couldn't help but wonder if that ghostly figure was not there to haunt me, but to save me from the accident. Who was he? The previous owner was alive and well, and the car had no history of accidents. To this day, the mystery remains unsolved. But one thing's for sure, I owe my life to that spectral guardian, whoever he was. Last weekend, when I was out having a blast with a few old college friends, one of them, famously dubbed the cool big sis back in our student days, shared a chilling experience she had when buying a used car a while back. I'm recounting this story here as a heads up for anyone passing by. Buying used cars comes with its risks, and it's always wise to tread carefully if you don't know the history of the vehicle. So this friend of mine already had a car at home, but earlier in the year, she won a vehicle registration lottery. For those of you not familiar, getting a car registration through the lottery can be as tough as nails, so when you win, you don't waste it. After discussing it with her family, they decided to buy a said car at a low price to use the license plate on. They scoured several used car platforms, but everything was either too expensive or too beaten up. That's when her husband's acquaintance, who dabbled in the used car market, mentioned he had a red Civic that was practically new, asking if they were interested. Upon seeing the car, which looked dazzlingly new, and hearing the price, they thought they had hit the jackpot. Since the seller was an acquaintance, they didn't overthink it and quickly made the purchase and completed the transfer of ownership. For a while, everything seemed fine. The car was mainly driven by my friend's husband for commuting. However, during a day when her car was unavailable due to restrictions, she, who used a Civic, and immediately noticed a strong scent of cheap perfume. Confused, she confronted her husband, who was clueless about any smell. The situation escalated when they found a tube of lurid lipstick in the car during a family trip, which was certainly not purchased by any of them. An argument ensued, ruining their outing and leading to a tense atmosphere at home. Things got even more disturbing when my friend had a vivid nightmare about a woman with a gruesomely disfigured face, adding to the strange occurrences tied to the car. But what truly alarmed them was an incident involving her husband. Late one night, while driving the Civic, he picked up an elderly man hitchhiking. After dropping the man off, the old man eerily mentioned that the car was unclean and hinted it was involved in a grim story of a young woman who died tragically in the vehicle. Shaken by this, and connecting it with the nightmare and the unexplained perfume and lipstick, they decided to sell the car immediately. Under pressure, the seller eventually admitted the car's previous owner was involved in a deadly altercation with a client at a nightclub, which had resulted in the tragic death of the woman. After the car was sold, my friend and her family experienced a noticeable peace, and the nightmares and unsettling feelings ceased. While buying a used car might save some money up front, the hidden history of some vehicles can carry unexpected and sometimes terrifying baggage. Let's just say I'm steering clear of the used car market for a while. Growing up in a small town in the Midwest, the onset of mobile technology felt like a revolution to us. I remember back when I was probably in middle school, cell phones were just starting to become a thing. They were still quite pricey, not just the cost of the phone itself, but all the added fees for service, roaming, you name it. So not everyone had one yet. My dad got himself a cell phone out of necessity for his job. His workplace covered the monthly bills, but the initial cost of the phone was on him. On the day of this particular story, I had just come back from school to an empty house. My parents were still at work. The house felt eerily quiet, the curtains drawing long shadows across the room. My dad wasn't used to carrying his phone around yet and had left it at home on his desk. I remember noticing the small, faint, blinking light on the phony, a new voicemail. Being the curious kid I was, I couldn't resist checking it out. My dad hadn't set a passcode on his phone yet, so I accessed the voicemail with ease. I pressed play, but there was nothing at first. just the hissing sound of dead air. I thought maybe the caller didn't know how to leave a message or was too shy and hung up, but then a strange, prolonged groaning sound emerged from the speaker. It felt so visceral, like it was coming from the depths of someone's throat. The sound made my skin crawl as if a bunch of insects were scurrying all over me. I felt a chill that wasn't just from the eerie sound, but from the sensation that the noise wasn't limited to the phone, like the entire room was filled with this unsettling presence. I tried to end the playback, but I was frozen in place, bombarded by the haunting groan that seemed to dissolve into the very air of the room. The horror only ceased when my dad came home, key turning in the lock, snapping me back to reality. My parents later listened to the voicemail, but only heard static. They figured I just had an overactive imagination or was stressed from school. However, the experience left me with a deep fear of cell phones. I couldn't even bring myself to check the voicemail alone anymore, feeling tormented by the mere sight of the blinking notification light. Some time passed, and we eventually moved into a bigger house, which helped me gradually forget that terrifying experience. Then one summer day, coming back from the movies, I walked into a tense atmosphere at home. My parents were sitting quietly at the kitchen table, looking worried, with the cell phone between them. Dinner hadn't been made, signaling something was off. My dad asked me to listen to a new voicemail they had received. More static, but this time a barely discernible voice uttered, "You wait." Despite the poor quality, the message instantly brought back my haunting memories. Even with my parents right there, the fear was overwhelming. We couldn't figure out who the caller was, as there was no caller ID. Discussing whether to involve the police, we eventually decided against it, reasoning it must be some sort of prank. Yet, this decision was soon proven to be a grave mistake. Following an evening at a wedding, we returned late to find the phone's notification light blinking ominously in the dark. Reluctantly, my dad played the new message. Amidst more static, the voice was now clearer, threateningly saying, "You wait! I'm coming!" Panicked, we considered all possibilities. None of us could recall making any enemies or offending anyone to this degree. Our speculation led nowhere until we remembered the phone was second-hand, bought from a local shop specialized in refurbished tech. It dawned on us that these threats might be aimed at the phone's previous owner instead of us. The next day, my parents and I split up. They went to trace the phone calls through our service provider, while I visited the shop we bought the phone from. Unfortunately, the shop had closed down following a police raid on unlicensed tech dealers. Similarly, the phone company's records showed no unusual calls, leaving us with dead ends everywhere. The situation escalated further when we received another ominous message, hinting at an imminent confrontation. Fearing for our safety, we finally decided to report the situation to the police, providing all the evidence we had. The investigation revealed the previous owner was involved in criminal activities and had gone missing. The threats were indeed not meant for us, but it was a close call into a dangerous world we never wanted any part of. Always be cautious with second-hand technology. You never know its history or what kind of danger it might bring to your doorstep.